Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly break down the key tactical talking points in Chelsea's comfortable win over Norwich to ensure that they build on their gap ahead of Leicester City and Manchester United. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Chelsea in their 4-3-3, and we ended up seeing Norwich shift into more of a 4-5-1. When we looked at how they did approach it, you had Olivier Giroud occupying the two center backs. Out in the wider areas, Willian was adopting a narrow position ahead of Lewis, and that created space for Azpilicueta to push forward. And we saw something similar on that opposite side, where Pulisic was drifting into space ahead of Godfrey, and there were times where he was dropping off into space ahead of Cantwell and Rupp. And when Alonso would receive the ball in advanced positions to pull out Aarons or Cantwell, then you would see Pulisic looking to dart into that space in behind the Norwich fullback to receive the ball. When we shift back to Chelsea's right-hand side, you have Azpilicueta in advanced positions, and then Willian and Loftus-Cheek at times would shift their positions as well. You would see Willian drop off a bit deeper to get on the ball, and Loftus-Cheek would push forward, and that does make sense because if you could get crosses out into those wider areas, what you can end up seeing is that Loftus-Cheek could peel off Lewis and use his aerial advantage to serve as a goal threat. When Willian looked to shift out into those wider areas, Lewis tracked him very well and stuck tight. And frankly, when Willian shifted out into that zone, he struggled to get the better of Hernandez, who dropped off deeper, and Lewis, who was his 1v1 matchup. When you move to that midfield zone, the problem that Chelsea has encountered is that they're incapable of breaking lines on a consistent basis. Because when they're positioned in that base shape, you end up seeing Loftus-Cheek and you see Kovacic in those gaps between the wide players in Hernandez and Cantwell, and McLean and Rupp. So what you end up seeing there is that those players are struggling to get on the ball. Loftus-Cheek was looking to push forward. And as that game continued, Kovacic began to drop off a bit deeper to get on the ball and make it more of a 4v1 in that zone. In the earlier stages, you ended up seeing Jorginho sliding balls across Hernandez to Azpilicueta. He would drop off deep to form a back three if he needed to. And you also saw him shift out diagonal balls over Cantwell into the path of Marcos Alonso. But when you break down the tactical reasons as to why Norwich struggled here, you have to look at their overall shape. In that narrow 4-5-1, they have Cantwell and Hernandez in narrow positions, and that creates space for Azpilicueta and Marcos Alonso to push forward, and they were always free outlets to get the ball into. The other factor here was that one, Dermich doesn't offer you much of a counter-attacking threat, and in a 1v2 situation, Rudiger and Zuma have the strength, pace, and athleticism to nullify his overall threat. And then given the fact that they allowed the center backs to push forward, although they weren't splitting defensive lines with their passes on a consistent basis, they were able to consistently bypass Norwich's shape to clip diagonal balls out to the fullbacks. And then on top of that, Norwich didn't have any answers for the movement of Giroud or Pulisic, specifically with Pulisic darting into space behind Aarons or looking to make late runs into the box to pull markers away from Giroud or vice versa, and that was a big problem for the away side here. So when we look to the key factors that led to Chelsea's success, we'll start with Kovacic's impact in that midfield zone, and then we'll get to how Giroud and Pulisic's movement were able to get Chelsea into quality goal-scoring positions. His ability to drop off deeper and drag out Rupp out of position saw him dribble past Rupp and then locate Azpilicueta free down that right channel by clipping a diagonal ball over Hernandez and Lewis. When Azpilicueta receives that ball, you have Giroud darting in between the center backs to the front post, and you also witness Pulisic in a central position in between Tete and Cantwell break towards the box late, and he ends up running across Aarons, but Azpilicueta's front post cross is cleared by Lewis. When we look to another example, you have Kovacic ahead of that Norwich midfield five, and then you see Pulisic occupying space in midfield between Cantwell and Rupp. What Kovacic ends up doing is that when Tete steps late in towards him, he ends up splitting McLean and Hernandez, as Hernandez was occupying Willian in a narrow position, to find Azpilicueta once again ahead of Lewis. What you end up seeing from Giroud and Pulisic is pivotal here, because what you see from Pulisic here is that he leaves that gap to dart in between Godfrey and Aarons to take them out of the game, and that allows Giroud to run across close. And when that pullback is played, the only issue that Chelsea encountered here was that Giroud mishit his shot. And if we look to one more example of Kovacic's impact, this time you see him dropping off deeper to the right of Dermich to get on the ball. You end up having Pulisic drifting laterally towards Tete, and with no pressure on Kovacic, he ends up splitting Cantwell and Rupp to find Marcos Alonso once again, breaking down that left channel. And the manner in which Giroud plays a key role here is that he drags Godfrey out of position, and he ends up backheeling the ball beyond close into the path of Willian, but Lewis makes a last-ditch tackle. And while Kovacic was the star of that midfield trio due to his passing and his ability to evade challenges, this was still about Giroud and Pulisic's movement that made the difference for Chelsea. When we look to one example, it's Zuma stepping forward into that Norwich half, and he ends up splitting Aarons and Cantwell to find Marcos Alonso breaking forward. What should be noted there is that Pulisic was ahead of Aarons, and when Marcos Alonso received that ball, you end up seeing Pulisic drop off Aarons to shift to the shoulder of Rupp. When Alonso receives that ball, you slowly see Pulisic running off Rupp to break into the box, and that's when Alonso combines with Pulisic with his pullback, but Pulisic fires a first-time effort into side netting. You have Zuma clipping a diagonal ball out into the path of Marcos Alonso, which attracts Cantwell and Aarons, and in that build-up, you end up seeing Pulisic's original positioning in between Tete and McLean, but he shifts laterally towards Alonso, and they end up playing a quick 1-2 beyond Cantwell and Aarons, and it leads to Marcos Alonso fizzing a low ball through that 6-yard box, but the center backs blocked off Giroud to ensure that he couldn't get onto it. What ultimately led to that match winner was his movement across the center backs to receive a ball beyond Aarons played by Marcos Alonso, and that plays Pulisic in a 1v1 situation with Cantwell. Pulisic was able to cut onto his right foot and locate Giroud peeling off the center backs at the back post, and those two combined once again to put Chelsea ahead just before halftime. And although we did see a positive start from Norwich in that second half due to the fact that they now were stepping forward to press, it was the combination play between Pulisic and Giroud that did get Chelsea into really good positions. We ended up seeing Giroud receive the ball ahead of Aarons, Marcos Alonso make a forward run to peg back Buendia, and with Giroud ahead of Aarons on the ball, Pulisic ends up darting beyond Tete and Godfrey to receive the scoop ball over the top from Giroud. That created a chance for Pulisic, but he was denied by Krul. And then following an aerial duel that involved Giroud, Tete, and Klose, what we ended up seeing was that the ball fell into the path of Pulisic ahead of Godfrey, and Pulisic was able to combine with Giroud to bypass Klose and McLean, and Pulisic was able to break forward, drop the ball off into the path of Willian, and that ultimately led to an Azpilicueta cross that found Marcos Alonso at the back post, and once again should have doubled Chelsea's lead. But as you can see, in a dire time where Chelsea desperately need points to secure a top 4 spot, and the opposition is looking to exploit flaws in their overall setup, it's the combination play between Giroud and Pulisic combined with their movement across the pitch in that final third that has been the difference maker for Chelsea. And once again here, that was the reason why they were able to claim all 3 points. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.